Welcome to our next lesson, where it's time to introduce a second, very different way of relating to our thoughts. You might remember our earlier discussion about stepping back and starting to watch things in our life more carefully. This time, we're talking about stepping back and watching what's going on in our head. When we do this, we start to discover things about our thoughts we may not have noticed before.
The moment we can stop and pause and look at our thoughts is the moment we realize that we are not our thoughts, and that thoughts aren't facts. Thoughts are mental events that seem to, come and go like dissipating clouds in the sky.
Directing attention to someplace deeper than thinking, and I think that is right. The notion that you don't have to believe and go along with every thought that you have, that it's not somehow mandated, that involvement is not mandated, like the mind is, who even knows where half the stuff in our brain comes from, when you're a teenager, it's like it can feel, there can be so much pressure to conform to certain thought patterns, and that's precisely why at that point you need to give people tools to question it, or else it becomes kind of like a torture chamber.
I think it's really important to talk about the thought process, because as adults in Western culture, we tend to be very thought-centric. For most adults, if they're honest, they'll admit that their central experience is related to the thought process. They can also have emotional experience, but for the most part, certainly my experience has been that the thought process tends to dominate.
Rather than reflecting the true reality of our lives and who we are, thoughts may therefore be seen as something quite different. Like weather patterns or clouds passing in the sky, for instance, thoughts or feelings can change, even moment by moment.
Mindweather is the idea that our thoughts and feelings can sometimes hit us and be stormy. Like the weather outside, it can some days can just be stormy, while other days can be easy and sunny and fair. We've all experienced the fluctuation between feelings that just happens. And other days can just be torrential and really tough and almost tsunami-like in their hitting us. I was sitting at work one day. I had arrived at work and I was working through the afternoon, and I was just hit with memories and thoughts of past situations. I was at work, I was on the clock, I was doing what I was supposed to do, and it just hit me.
Those coalitions of neurons that support the conscious experience of something, let's say anxiety on the one hand, or depression, or joy or self-confidence on the other, that particular collection of synapses lasts no longer than a few seconds. It's very fleeting. Coalitions form in a fraction of a second. They persist like eddies in the stream and a river swirling by, bits of flotsam and jetsam that correspond to that particular thought or feeling or desire or memory or reaction. And then, whoosh, as the little kids say, all gone. It disperses. And then sometimes it's regenerated again if there are persistent patterns, like a standing wave in a river crossing over a boulder. Yes, there is some stability in that pattern, and yet if we look closely at it, both psychologically and neurologically, it's extremely dynamic. It's transient, it's fleeting, it's impermanent, in other words.
Everything is constantly changing, including thoughts and emotions. And if you really understand that from inside out, because you've had that experience before, then it feels safe to let yourself be in pain, because it'll just wait. It's like the weather in Kansas, wait 10 minutes and it'll change. It's the same thing with our emotions and our thoughts. Just wait. It'll be okay.
Stepping back from thoughts doesn't mean we ignore them. Sometimes you may decide to let a thought pass or turn away from it. Other times a thought may offer important teaching. The important thing from this vantage point, once again, is that it's your choice to make.
This is not to say that thoughts and feelings are just arbitrary and they just kind of happen willy-nilly and they don't mean anything, they don't connect to anything. No. Certainly, feelings and thoughts are often meaningfully connected to what we do, how we treat people, what we eat, whether we're practicing certain things that are meaningful to us, like meditation or spiritual practice, etc. Feelings and thoughts can be meaningfully connected to many things. What this means is they are not necessarily connected to anything meaningful.
Once we see thoughts as possibilities rather than facts, then we have space to relate to them differently. Some thoughts we can identify with and act on, while others we can just let pass.
When you start to really scrutinize your thinking, when you really start to look at what are the thoughts coming up in my brain day by day, and what are those thoughts, how do those lend to the beliefs I have and the way I show up in the world? If you can just push back from that thought, and anybody can do this, they can become aware of this recurring thought, they can push back from that, and they can decide how much they want that belief to define their life.
Back off and watch the thoughts go by like a river. And it's just so much more relaxing, and it gives you so much relief to do that.
It's an idea that we don't have to take literally any thought or feeling that comes. We can watch them, we can observe them, and we can sense, is there meaning in this for me? Is this something that is connected to my life?
If you could see that, that's all that's necessary. You don't have to dispute it, you don't have to change it, you don't have to make it go away. You can just continue to watch it, and as you continue to watch it, you can see it evolve and change and shift, and suddenly there's movement. And a little movement leads to more movement, and the more movement becomes more space becomes more ease. And over time, with consistent practice, you can begin to sort of shake loose that hardened thought that was really, in your mind, a fact. And this is that process of beginning to see thinking as something that you don't have to believe, that you can just notice it happening.
Among other things, this introduces new options and new freedom in choosing how to relate to these thoughts and feelings.
So learning these skills of watching thoughts and feelings and being able to choose our behavior is crucial. I think it's not a choice, I think it's multiple choices, and it's multiple choices a minute or a day. And the choice is, first, am I going to choose to be consumed by my thinking or to observe my thinking? One of the things I tell my students is you want to have your thinking or feeling without your thinking or feeling having you.
These are brain secretions, thoughts. If we can begin to just notice that they are just that they are something that the brain has offered up, that we can consider, that we can take or not take, that we can consider and investigate, and then choose whether or not to believe them. So just to be able to develop to know that you actually have a relationship with your brain is immense. That what it issues up may seem very valuable, and it may not be, but the point of the matter is not that your brain is right or wrong, but that it's offering something up for your consideration, and you get to choose. Then we have some options. We aren't at the mercy of this brain that does what it does, sometimes with very logical reasons and sometimes not.
The way that I think about it is that the brain has a thought pump, right? It's this thing that just kind of pumps out thoughts, something that is sort of like on its own, pumping out these thoughts, right? And these thoughts can either kind of pass by, or we might attach to them and actually grow the thought in some way, right? Or elaborate on the thought in some way. And that's where I think our attention becomes critical. We might not have any control of the thought pump pumping out these thoughts, but what we do after the thought exists in our awareness is within our control. Are we going to grow that thought? And for example, if it's a negative thought or a depressing thought, are we going to give it a lot of attention and actually have the thought grow? Are we going to elaborate on that thought with rumination for hours? Or are we going to actually notice the thought happen and let it go on its way?
from the moment of that recognition, it was a lot of practice learning to just push back from the thought process and really see them for what they were, rather than getting absorbed in the content of the thought, rather than assuming that the thought is important and that it has meaning and that I need to interpret it, which of course only leads to more thinking. I would just learn to push back a little bit and start to just observe the flow of thought, the movement of thought.
We can either be swept away by the stream, identified with it, or caught up in the movie of it, as it were, believing it as real. Or we can have a capacity to step back from it and have a sort of a bird's eye view perspective.